Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to come about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the government's latest Brexit plans to massively scale back British farming in preparation for making us even more dependent upon food imports, especially the much cheaper food imports of lower health standards that the Conservatives' agriculture bill has laid the way for. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the farming industry, of course, is one of those that was always set to be shafted, one of the most, and the majority of the communities that depend on agriculture overwhelmingly voted for Brexit, and the Conservative government that are delivering the hardest possible form of Brexit. Many farms, of course, rely upon subsidies from the EU, or did do, which are now being phased out. The government made no promise to keep them in place, making the decision to vote for this last year all the more perplexing. And now the government have announced further plans to reduce the already limited payments, which will be gone completely by 2027. Many farms, you would think, are also going to be gone with them, because the latest announcement is all about openly wanting farms to close, or at least completely change what they do. It has been billed as boosting nature. And, you know, in the fact, if you look at it, if you look at the way British farming has operated in the past, it's not, there hasn't been the encouragement to make the most sustainable use of land. That is true. Hedgerows are cut at the drop of a hat in order to cut corners. Something that a more involved agriculture policy, even at the EU level, this isn't all about British governments, of course, this is at the EU level, could have avoided. It has been argued that if there's going to be any benefits, like we keep trying to say, well, let's try and find some benefits of Brexit. Is there anything we could do better than the EU have done? Well, actually, in terms of agricultural policy, we could promote a more sustainable way of farming that don't mean cutting back on the hedgerows, for example, damaging the health of the countryside. But that's not what actually is being talked about here. That's not the thrust of it. It may have a knock-on effect of improving the health of the countryside. It may be an indirect effect. But the sole purpose is to realise the ultimate Conservative Thatcherite dream of removing the state from everything. Because if farms can't manage under their own capitalist steam, let them rot. That's what this announcement is all about. Now, on the face of it, you could argue that the motivation doesn't matter. Will the countryside regenerate as a result of these measures? Probably. It certainly seems that that would be likely at first, at any rate. But the government aren't promoting more sustainable methods of farming with these announcements and with the way they want to use these subsidies. They're promoting nowhere near as much farming. The countryside health may improve is simply because it's not going to be managed. You know, we're going to be producing less food for ourselves, and of course less for export. And a strong nation, you should argue, would make every effort to avoid being reliant upon imports of items, resources that are crucial to national security. So we should ensure that we can always produce our own steel, for example, our own medicines, source our own power, communications infrastructure, and supply enough food. When you are reliant upon others, then national security can be threatened by changes in the geopolitical landscape. You may say, well, the countries we import these things from are friends with us. Okay, what happens when they are no longer friends? Because geopolitics changes. But the Conservatives just have this one driving ideology: remove the state. Take away government involvement in everything. The result is obvious. If we produce less food, we need to import more. We also, of course, reduce our export market, like I say. So we need to import more food. Also, we can't afford to buy as much food because we make less money. You're cutting out on an export market. If we don't produce as much food from farming, we're not replacing that with another industry for which we can export something else, something more profitable potentially. We're not replacing it with anything that's going to be fit for export. So we just make less money. So where does that lead? Well, we need more food. We don't have as much to afford it. What do? We get cheaper food. Inevitable. And at this point, the concept of having to import cheap food from other countries that does not meet what hitherto have been considered acceptable safety standards switches from being something that we need in order to get that US trade deal to a necessity. because then the government get to say, well, we just don't get enough food, we're going to have to import this stuff to have enough food to make food affordable for the poorest. And when those cheap imports start rolling in, the media, of course, will play their part. They will have the nerve to cheer our reliance upon this food in the brave new world of Brexit. And what of the farmers themselves? So those in the industry are currently concerned, which you might expect, but they're concerned that they're going to be faced with cuts to their income without any clear government guidance on what they need to work towards. Because the government has said that the total amount of subsidies will remain the same. It won't long term, but it's going to remain the same. They're just changing what those subsidies are for. So the government are talking about subsidising other things, other practices, but they're not really offering much on the details. So the farmers don't know how to plan several years ahead to make sure that they can still access these subsidies. Makes it impossible for them to plan ahead, in fact. At which point, farmers are in exactly the same boat as every other industry that's waiting for the government to make its mind up on what the systems are going to be and what the government want these businesses to do. Point of case, the next video is going to be one for the haulage industry. And there have been a few interesting results from the announcements as well. So on the whole, most of the payments seem to be going to those who need it the least. Okay, yeah, that checks out as a typical Thatcherite policy. Yeah, I can believe that. Farmers have also said that the payments, they should be linked to food production. So why aren't you linking them to food production then? If the government cared about our national security, then of course they would seek to encourage as little reliance on food imports as possible. But they don't, like I said. They want to create an environment where we're desperate for cheap food imports. Absolutely desperate. So much so that the opposition to the eventual US trade deal on food safety grounds dwindles as much as possible just out of necessity. Because, well, they'll say, well, we just don't produce enough of our own food. Our farmers just aren't producing enough, so of course we have to import. And, you know, we're not doing very well. You know, your wages are absolute crap. So you're going to you can't afford, you know, more expensive import. You're going to have the cheap imports. We're doing our bit by arranging these trade deals that give you the nice cheap food. What are you moaning about? Actually makes perfect sense for the government to discourage food production, food farming, because if there's no farming, then, you know, a laissez-faire government like we get with Conservative governments, absolutely delighted by the lack of any work in managing it as well. Means they don't have to do anything. You know, this will principally affect farms in England. Wales and Scotland do get to spend their allocation of budget however they like. However, it may not all be, you know, beer and skittles, because the Welsh government have said that Johnson seems to be forking over less money than they got under the EU. So in other words, he's also redistributing it. And yet Boris Johnson has promised exactly the same levels of funding. So if it is true, if the Welsh government are correct in that they are not getting as much as they did under the EU subsidies scheme, then where's the extra going? But again, doesn't surprise me. Johnson wants to set in motion a scheme where the funding can be removed completely at some point in the future. So all right, I'm saying, well, we're keeping it like it is now, we're just changing what the subsidies are for. You get to as soon as you get to the point where funding isn't linked to food production, then it can be easily dispensed with altogether, because, well, why should the government pay for you to do this, that, or that? It's not helping us get more food. Why would we do that? Obviously, they'll do this gradually. They always do everything gradually so that you don't notice. George Eustace, who's a cabinet minister involved in this, was on the radio yesterday, and he was saying, well, you know, putting tariffs on EU. So he's now talking up a no deal, talking up the old no deal. Yeah, well, we put tariffs on EU agricultural products, and that creates new opportunities for British farmers. I mean, it's not immediately obvious to me how all this squares up with specific announcements. So what agricultural products then, George? So if it's agricultural products that are needed for farming, you know, machinery and so on, then you're forcing farmers to pay more for their equipment and other resources. That doesn't help them. And if what he means by the products of agriculture is, you know, what they produce, he just forgot the word food, then he's suggesting that, okay, well, if food from the EU is too expensive, then that helps British farmers produce their own. Well, even if you follow that line of thought, then you're still making it more expensive for the British population, millions of whom are already in food poverty. That doesn't help them. And also, you know, he seems to have forgotten that the plans of his own department are to subsidise away from food production. They're encouraging farms to do other things, not related to food production. You know, help managing the land. I mean, that's fine. I'm fully in favour subsidising for farmers to manage the land, to reduce the incidence of flooding, to improve the health of the countryside, but not to abandon food production whilst they're at it. And so from what I can tell, basically farmers have been told that their subsidies for the sorts of activities they've been used to, producing food, is to be cut, removed altogether by 2027, gone completely. In return, they're told that subsidies will exist for other activities. So if they carry on with the normal activities now, they're not going to get anywhere near as much. It's been phased out quite drastically. But if you do other things, then there is some money, but with only a vague vision of what those other things are. Not many details just yet. And I remember thinking last year that the general election was the most pivotal general election I can ever remember. The difference 2019 was going to make to the UK, because normally people just have the view, if the wrong party wins from their point of view, well, maybe the next one will win next time and it will be fine. No, it won't. Because where we'll be in 2024, the UK will have changed so dramatically, not even sure I'll be able to call it the UK, will have changed so dramatically that it doesn't matter what government takes charge in 2024. They won't be able to reverse this. The best they can do is to stop and change direction, but they won't be able to go back. There will be no going back. You'll just have to forge a different path to somewhere else. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.